So it's like you create this nest here with these 3 pawns, and you put the op or the sniper inside of this, and it's very compact, very safe, and you don't get rid of it. You just keep it here. It's like the op. You just sit in that corner like Wardell. You just sit in that corner. You hold that corner, and when your opponent falls asleep and moves a knight or something, then you get the headshot and you checkmate on G7. So c4 is played. Now, xQc thought for a while they played the knight to f6. So one thing that's important here is when you play the opening phase, especially this d4, d5, c4 sort of opening, what you want to do with the black pieces is either you have to just commit to either capturing the pawn or pushing a pawn in the center. Because when you bring the knight out right away, what it allows white to do is white can trade the pawns and push this pawn forward, and white gets the critical center part of the board with knight c3 and knight f3, and these 2 pawns are very, very strong here. So you don't really want to allow that to happen. So generally speaking, when your opponent pushes the pawns on moves 1 and 2 and you copy like this, you have to decide what do you want to do. Do you want to recapture this pawn, or do you want to defend it with a pawn, either with one of these 2 pawn pushes forward? Because the problem is if you or not the problem, sorry, but one of the things is when you push this pawn, if white takes white takes the pawn, you can recapture with the pawn, and you'll see that white does not get to control the center. Pawns are opposite each other, and you can still develop this bishop on this critical diagonal with the black pieces here. So generally what I would recommend here if your opponent plays like this, and especially for xQc, is to push this pawn on the second move, because sure, you close this diagonal down temporarily, but you do not want to give white the option to get pawns on these 2 critical central squares. So you want to push the pawn, either this pawn, or you can push the other pawn forward as well to keep this diagonal open, but you definitely want to push one of these 2 pawns, or you want to recapture. So those are the 3 options you have here. But what I would recommend is probably what he did in the game, which is push the pawn here. And then after knight c3, move the knight forward so that when white goes bishop g5, you can respond with bishop e7 to cut this pin of the white bishop towards your queen. And this actually turns into what happens in the game, because after knight f6, knight c3, e6, bishop g5, we have a transposition. So here, what I would recommend that xQc plays, is not to move the bishop. I would recommend that he moves the knight here. Reason being that if white were to ever trade these pawns on d5, let's say pawn takes, if white takes the pawn on d5, this is a big mistake. You would think, uh-oh, my queen is pinned here. However, in this case, you can play knight takes knight. If white takes the queen, you can again go bishop to b4 check. And first of all, while you have sacrificed your queen for 1 piece, you put this white king in check. And the only way that white can stop the check is to play queen to d2. And so after queen d2, you take the queen. White has to take back with the king. And now after king takes bishop, black is simply up one bishop here. So at this point, black is up 1 juicer. You have 2 knights and a bishop, and white has a bishop and a knight. So it's much better for black. So let's go back. So okay, if we go back to the start of this line, so that's why I like this knight move, because now you'll see white can't capture because of this aforementioned trick. If white captures the knight on f6 here, I play knight takes bishop, and now the knight guards this pawn, so white is never attacking. And you can follow it up with a very simple concept, which is to play bishop to d6, pawn to c6, castle. So for example, let's say knight f3, bishop d6, e3, pawn to c6, create this pawn chain so your bishop is stable here, and it's always eyeing this diagonal, and white moves the bishop, castles, and you play rook e8. And here you can play knight e4 with bishop f5. You can also move your bishop to g4 to pin the queen. And this is very similar to what I'm going to mention after this as well, in terms of a white opening that I like for xQc. So generally you want the bishop with these pawns around it, and it's very, very solid. So when you move the knight here, normally white will trade, and white will now continue the normal development. White will play something like pawn to e3. You go bishop to e7 here, and now after white plays knight to f3, again you castle. White puts the bishop here, again eyeing your pawn on h7. And so now you'll support with the pawn like this. You create the connect 3. White castles. And your way of developing this bishop, since the knight is in the way, it's not intuitive, but the way to do it is to move the rook here, and you're going to follow up with knight here and bishop to g4 next move. Or if white tries to stop you with like a pawn push, you can go knight f8, queen c2 for example. No longer can you develop the bishop to these 2 squares. So now you shift the viewpoint and you play knight to e4. And the point is that here, this is all about the tactics. So we see that if white trades the bishop, you take with the queen, and now you have 1, 2, 3, which guard the knight. White has 1, 2, 3 that attack the knight. So you have 3 defending, they're 3 attacking, 3 defending, so it's defended. And if your opponent decides to, let's say, take this knight, you now take this bishop, white takes back, and you take back with your queen. And now basically the position is even, and white moves the bishop away because it's under attack. You can even go bishop takes pawn because the king is pinned by the queen on g5. So because of this, this is very, very good for black. So now let's go back to the start. So the way this works again is since everything is so stable, what you want to do is when white castles, you want to move the rook. So first step, you want to move the knight so you can think about getting this bishop and then bringing the rook into the game. So then if white tries to stop you, you still follow the plan, but now since you no longer have squares for the bishop to go to, you shift the idea and you move your knight to e4 here. And so at this point, the position is completely fine for black. Let's say white trades, you take with the queen, guard this 3 times, and next move you're going to bring the bishop out and bring your rook either to this c8 or d8, one of these 2 squares, and then try to follow up with a knight g6, knight h4. So I think this is a pretty stable opening choice. Very important to play like this in order to get out of the opening phase of the game without something really, really bad. And I would also add as well, you really want to try to visualize where your pieces belong, where you want to put them. So you need to do the pure calculation of making sure you're not making a blunder, but you want to make sure that you think about the ideas. Way too dependent on exact move order, need to explain the ideas more. I think this is pretty straightforward. You castle the king, put the pawn to support, you go rook e8, knight f8, and you try to bring the bishop out. So I think it's pretty straightforward, you guys. This is not some lesson for grandmaster level chess. You have to keep that in mind as well. So you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Try to look to bring the bishop out. If white ever tries to stop you, then you jump with your knight and you offer the trade of these 2 bishops. So let's go back. So here xQc plays bishop d7, which is not a very good move because what happens is white can take this knight, and white now ends up a pawn. So when you go back here, you'll see you have 1, 2, 3 that guard, and your opponent has 1, 2 that attack. So that's why bishop e7 is a better move, because first of all, it protects. You're still guarding. You have one and 2 to guard this point if white removes the knight. But secondly, by bringing the bishop out, you break the pin. So right now your knight is pinned here by this bishop, so you break the pin. So that's why that's a better move, or the idea that I mentioned, knight bd7 first to go for the tricks. You'd think, oops, I blundered this pawn, but in fact, it's not a blunder because you have this check. And when white does not fall for this trick, and white moves moves like the pawn or the knight out, either one, then you break the pin again by putting the bishop here, and you're always looking to recapture with the knight to stabilize this pawn on the central square. So let's go back. So we have bishop d7, white trades. Again, important to note, if pawn takes, if white plays knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, bishop takes queen, runs into the same trick with bishop b4 check, and now white has to block again. You take the queen, and then you take the bishop on d8, and once again, you're up an extra bishop. Because you have 1, 2, 3 for 2. So let's go back. So Fintan takes on f6, correct move. Queen takes f6 is correct. Takes, white takes the pawn correctly. White is up a pawn. Queen d6, e4. And here xQc played an excellent move, and this is one thing I would say that's important when you're trying to think things through and you're down a pawn here. When your opponent gets a big center like this, the thing you want to look for is ways to attack the center of the board. And f5 was an excellent move because you try to remove the pawn, which stabilizes the knight in the center here. White cannot push or capture because then the knight will be under attack and you'll lose the knight. So white plays bishop d3, knight to c6 here. Knight f3, castles. xQc plays g6, another extremely good move here to try and develop the bishop and put pressure on the other central pawn. So this pawn is immobilized because he can't move it without dropping the knight, and now you look to play on the diagonal where you're going to get a nice wooden shield. So white goes to a3, bishop g7, excellent move, pressure, 2 things, 1, 2, attacking, only 1 defending, so you would win the pawn. So white goes queen a4, so biased? No, I'm not being biased, I'm talking at this level, you guys. So queen a4 is played here, and here xQc played the wrong order. He makes a blunder by capturing the pawn on d4 here, but I love the idea that he saw it, because even if this is a bad move, capturing, the fact that xQc saw that the bishop guards the knight, and the bishop on d7 hits the queen is very important. Again, you guys, I'm not being biased. I'm giving you a take at this level. I'm not being biased whatsoever. I mean, this is ridiculous. So here what xQc should have played was king to b8, because you still keep the idea to capture the pawn with the knight and bishop guarding it, and you guard the pawn on a7 with your king so white cannot jump and capture. But that being said, I still am impressed that xQc played knight takes pawn, because it shows that he saw the tactical idea. Now, king b8 is a better move, but it's also a move that I would not expect anybody to really find. I think it's borderline. It's just too much. I mean, it's way too nuanced. It's way too deep. I don't even think Wagamama, who is the prohibitive favorite for sure, would even find king b8 here. So he plays knight d4, queen a7. Now here xQc plays c6. Better would have been to trade the knights because it is a check, so white cannot make the checkmate. And after pawn takes knight, you can play a move like bishop to c6. And apparently this is winning for white, oddly enough. During the game, I was not so sure how good this was, but apparently this was winning. At any rate, I think this would have been the right approach. Instead, he plays c6, and now Fintan here, after playing more or less, I would say a more or less exemplary opening, no blunders, pretty straightforward, one or two slight mistakes, but nothing major, makes a big boo-boo here, because he plays queen to a8 check. And I think maybe he thought it was checkmate, because what he should have done here was played knight takes knight. And so now the problem is that if black ever plays pawn takes knight here, then white goes rook to c1 check, hitting the king. So your king can't ever move out of the way here. And of course, if you block with your queen on any square, white will just take the queen with the rook. So when you go bishop c6, the way that white wins here is white can play both moves. I'll give you guys the fancy solution. No, I won't, because that's sending the wrong signal. So white plays knight takes bishop, and now it's like black plays pawn takes knight, and white can go bishop to a6, which is checkmate here. King has no squares on this rank, and it's just in check. There are no squares. The queen dominates the king, and the bishop on a6 is also putting the king in check at the same time. So this would have been the correct way for Fintan to proceed, and he probably would have won this game. If black plays the other line, bishop takes knight, for example, it's still really, really bad. Queen takes knight, black takes. Now, there are many ways to be winning, but what I would recommend here is just very simple, just pawn takes pawn, probably. And just white is up a bunch of material here. White's up 2 pawns, and I think that this is very good. Somebody might have asked this, but do you think the sleep performance affected xQc's gameplay? No, on the contrary, I thought xQc played fantastically well. My big concern with xQc was that having not played much chess, as far as I could tell, that having not played much chess, I was worried that he might not play very well. And I thought his play today clearly showed that even if he's not playing chess on stream, he's either been watching chess streams or he's been studying games. He's been doing something offline, because he definitely has improved relative to his performance in PogChamps 1. So I don't know what he's done. I'm sure someone could ask him on his stream, but it's very clear to me that he's been doing something, because there is improvement, and we have not seen him playing much chess on stream, at least. He plays some games here and there on stream. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, let's go back. So queen a8 is what Fintan plays, and the problem now is after queen b8, the attack starts to fizzle out a little bit here, because one thing you always want to be mindful of is when you're attacking and your opponent has a weak king, trading down when you're only up like 1 pawn or 2 pawns. He's obviously been watching your stream. I don't know, maybe he has. I mean, he likes to fianchetto his bishop every time, so maybe, I mean, that would be a sign that he probably is. So c6, queen e8, now queen b8, and knight e7. And the problem is that here, even though white is up a pawn, if let's say white trades the queens, the whole position starts to fizzle out, because everything here is so loose for white. The knight's loose, your pawn is loose, and eventually there are going to be big issues on this open d file as well. So Fintan plays knight e7, which is a move I like. Knight b6 is the best move, I think, objectively, but I think it's a very, very hard move to play, because after king c7, having to see queen a5 here, I feel is way too 5-head. I would just say it's way too 5-head, in my opinion, because the notion is that the king here is stuck. You cannot move the king. If you come up, there are checks everywhere. Like, there's queen b4 check, hitting the king and the knight. There's knight c4 check, hitting the king. Your king is wide open in the center of the board. And I just feel it's a little bit too hard. But it is important for Fintan, especially if he does go back and look at this game, to see the notion, not really a notion, but to understand its patterns. It won't necessarily occur in this situation like this, but you will see where this notion where you can get like a queen and a knight aimed like this at the king can always give you there are a lot of dastardly ideas, like you can move the knight and just create all kinds of discovered checks towards this white king. So even if it's not this specific position, seeing some kind of thread where you can put the queen and the knight right on a diagonal towards the king is important to know. So let's go back. So instead, knight e7 is played, king e7, king c7, queen a5. Very nice decision by Fintan, bringing the queen. Discovered checks are basic. Discovered checks might be basic, but understanding that there's this idea, sort of seeing this lineup where you get the queen, where you get a queen and a knight aimed on a diagonal, is not something that I think you'll see. You'll understand the idea of, discovered checks, but seeing this lineup with the queen and the knight in tandem like this, I think is not traditional. And if Fintan is able to conceptualize the pattern, I think going forward it might happen in a game or two. It'll be like, oh wait, yeah, I remember that in this game against xQc I could have lined it up like that too. And so I think for sure it's possible. The flag is the flag of Malta, I believe. It is Malta, yes. Thank you, E. Holterman. Thanks for the subs. Taking a break. It's late here in Norway. It is very late in the EU right now. So thank you again for the gift of subs, and have a great rest of your evening, my man. Yeah, using discover checks is not difficult, but yeah, kind of seeing these ideas where you create the discover checks is very, very hard. It's not France, no, because it's like black or something. It's not green on the edge. No, sorry, it's not blue on the edge. Apologies. Okay, so instead, knight e7, king c7, queen a5. Here, xQc plays pawn to b6. Fintan plays queen b4. Best move in the position. Keeps the queen eyeing these pawns here. He also guards the knight. This knight is a little bit airy if you look at it because it has no good jumping squares. So ideas with like rook e8 and bishop f6, and this knight is kind of offsides and stranded here. It's very different, you guys, to find these ideas. So now he plays pawn to c5. Big mistake by xQc. Once again, pawns, as we say, are the soul of chess, and the pawn here guards a very critical square, restricting the white knight from coming into the game. So what xQc should have done here was traded. However, I do understand this move because it attacks the queen, but it also guards the knight twice so that white cannot grab the knight. Better would have been knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. Let's see what they say in the lines. And probably king to b7 here. Again, a move that no player in PogChamps would find. But the idea is that kind of you move the king out of the way and you want to line up some kind of battery, or you just want to bring the rook. And the thing is here with the king on b7, it's very safe behind the pawn wall. And for example, let's say you play rook e8, rook c1, bishop f8. This actually looks like a very logical move that's safe, but the problem is now white can jump back with the check on the king, and you can't capture the knight because your king would be in check here. So king b7 would be the best move. Again, nobody in PogChamps would play this move. It's very advanced, very, very dank. But the idea, maybe, the one thing I would say is to try to conceptualize the notion of moving something out of the way so you can line up things on a diagonal, potentially. But I would say in general, this is not... I would not expect anybody to find this. Instead, xQc plays c5. Fintan plays queen c4. Completely fine. Probably checking first is better, but queen c4 is fine. They trade bishop b2. Big mistake by xQc, because what you see here, I mean, it's probably losing anyway, but when you go for this pawn grab, what happens is now after rook b1, this knight is jumping and there are all kinds of forks, and your whole king side is going to collapse because now your shield around the king is no longer secure. So now he goes rook e8. Fintan finds knight d5. Fantastic move. If rook b2, rook e7, the game goes on, but Fintan correctly sees he can move the knight with a check on the king and then eat the bishop on b2 next move. So after king c6, he takes fe4. fe4 is fine. Bishop e4 maybe is slightly better, lining up actually another kind of discovered attack where your knight is going to be hopping every which way because the king is here. So bishop e4 is better, but fe4 is completely fine. So now bishop h3, rook b1, another perfect move by Fintan, lines up the double rooks on the b file, and the pawn on b6 is going adios. So he goes bishop e6, rook b6, trade, king d7, queen b5, king c8, queen c6. Absolutely perfect, finds the precise checkmate in 3, and Fintan wins the first game. So what I would say in general terms, a lot that can be taken away from this first game for xQc, specifically in the opening phase, I would say. As far as Fintan goes, more or less a very, very good game, I would say, overall. The only thing I would say for Fintan is that in the opening, perhaps, to understand that at this point, it wasn't necessary to push the pawn. Like, white can move the knight back, and if black tries to attack the center, you can just guard with this pawn chain, and you just follow it up with a very smooth, calm development, bishop to d3. Like, let's say here, bishop d3, knight f3, and just castle the king out of the center of the board. And the difference with this position versus in the game is that you'll see that these pawns are secure, and black can't attack these pawns. The center is very, very compact, it's very, very stable, and it can't be attacked. Whereas in the game, you'll see the center, it's still kind of stable, but black can destabilize it with this pawn push, bring the knight, and both of these pawns are under attack, whereas when you reach this one, it's just smooth sailing because these pawns can never be attacked at all. They just guard each other perfectly. So in this first game, what I would say is that it's important to note for Fintan, maybe a little bit more calm once he was up the pawn. He could have retreated. Don't try to overextend and go forward too fast. But overall, very, very nice game by Fintan. I was impressed with xQc's play for the most part. I mean, he had chances perhaps. King b8 is better, but I would not expect him to find it. I was very impressed that he saw the tactical idea. Even if it doesn't quite work, the fact that he saw it was a very good sign. And then, yeah, the moves were just too hard, but overall, I thought both players played very, very well. Fintan was clearly the better player, though, and he was a deserved winner of this first game. So, okay, let's move on to the second game. So let's pull this one up as well. Okay, this was the second game. Okay, so game starts e4, c6. And now one thing that I tried to explain in the post game when they both were on the interview was one thing you need to look for is look for similar patterns that you see in all kinds of different games. So like here, xQc played knight f3, which I would not recommend. What I'm going to recommend for xQc is to play something very similar, which is to play pawn here, take the center. His opponent will respond with pawn to d5. And now what I would recommend is trade the pawns and go bishop to d3. And the idea is to go c3 again. And just like in the last game, you'll see you get the bishop on the diagonal, and it's supported by this pawn chain 1, 2, 3. So the idea is to go bishop d3. When black plays knight c6, attacking the pawn, you go pawn to c3. You build the connect 3. Your bishop is safe inside. There's no way for black to get at it with his knight because your pawns guard the critical squares. And so normally what will happen is black will play something like knight to f6. And now what you do is you play bishop to f4. So you bring your bishops out, you control the center point, and let's say black plays pawn here. What you do is finish the development. You go knight f3. Black probably will play bishop here, trade the bishops, castle the king, both sides castle, and now you're going to play rook to e1. The idea is again the bishop on d3, very solid. It's the best piece on the board. It's like it's like the op here. It's always keeping an eye down towards the black king. So what you will do, just to give a textbook example, let's say black moves the bishop to d7 here. You will go knight e5, jumping with the knight. As you see, you guard twice. You have 1, 2. Black has 1, 2 to attack. So 1, 2, 1, 2, even trade, you're going to be ahead. And the problem is black cannot actually take this knight. So if black takes the knight here, you play pawn takes knight. And this is what we call a fork. The pawn forks the queen and the knight, and the rook guards the pawn. So you're going to win the queen, or win the knight. You're going to be ahead by at least 2 here. So black probably, let's just say black plays like rook to e8. Now what you do is you continue to support this knight. You push the pawn forward. So now if black takes, you can always capture with this pawn. So let's say black plays a move like rook here. Now you've got your bind in the center, your 2 pawns controlling this very strong knight here. So what you want to do is you want to bring your other piece into the game. So now you go knight here. Let's say black plays a move like pawn here. You can continue to develop your pieces. You can go knight to f3, over supporting. Let's say black goes pawn here. And now you can go like knight to g5. And the idea is you're starting to target everything. You're targeting this pawn with your knight and your bishop. You're also targeting this pawn on f7 with both of your knights. And you can follow it up with queen f3, queen h3, and put maximum pressure on the pawn on h7. So the point behind this opening generally is that you want to develop your bishop. You want to create the connect 3 and keep the op here aiming towards the pawn down in front of the rook. And then secondarily, what you want to do is you want to bring this bishop out, try to control this second diagonal as well. 3 straight knight moves. Well, yeah, normally players develop here. So you want to bring the bishops out, and then you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4. and try to put a knight in the center part of the board here. So this is the important thing to remember, and what I would recommend is when you bring the bishop out, create the connect 3. And going back to the previous game, it's very, very similar. So if I flip the board, just to give an example from this previous game that I was showing, let's say white plays this, and white trades and goes here. As you'll see, after knight d7, if white trades and goes to e3, it's the same thing. Actually, here you would play, you go here, bishop comes out, create the connect 3, white develops, you castle the king, and you go rook e8 with the same idea of bringing the knight and over supporting it on the central square. And it's not quite the same position because the colors are reversed, but it's the same general concept with using the two ops here, bringing both the bishops out and targeting down towards the white king in long term, trying to attack with your queen as well, which is why you would like to move this knight, so you create these squares for your queen to move on. So that's why, getting back to this game, let me flip the board again. I would highly recommend that xQc plays this, where he trades, brings the bishop, creates the connect 3, and brings the bishops out and castles the king. Very straightforward, not so easy, but I think the plan speaks for itself. And let's say black here tries to stop you from getting this other bishop on this diagonal, so you only have the one with like queen c7. You now force it by going knight to e2. Are the three connected pawns a well-known defense? This is the exchange Caro-Kann. This is actually the system that I played from the time I was about 1700 until about 23 or 2400 ranking. So I played this opening, and so I always have a lot of fond memories of it. And I think it's very smooth, very simple. The former world champions, both Bobby Fischer and Jose Raul Capablanca, both played this many, many times. So knight e2, and the idea is, again, black tries to stop you from getting the bishop here, but you bring the knight out and you go bishop to f4 next move, and your knight guards the bishop. So yeah, why did I not stick to it? Because you need to play many different setups at some point, which is very, very important. So if black goes queen c7, you go knight e2. If black does not do that, and black goes here, again, you get the two bishops, idea to bring the knights out. Now, the only thing black can do is, I said e6. The problem with e6 is it also shuts this bishop down. So black can try to bring the bishop out and then create his own connect 3. Because once you do this, the bishop is outside, whereas before, the bishop has no scope. It's just stuck behind the wall of pawns, whereas black can bring it out because the knight supports it. It attacks your queen. And so the way that I recommend to play is, again, play queen to b3. And if black plays like queen to d7, you go to guard the pawn, of course, from you capturing it. You go knight to d2, because you would like to go knight f3 and finish your plan. But you can't go... Did Raul ever yell goal when he checkmated someone? Very funny, you guys. But you want to go here, but now black can take, and you get these double pawns, one in front of the other, which is pretty yucky. So what you want to do is you want to play knight here first, so that now you can bring the knight forward, your knight guards, and you're not going to ruin your pawns. So black will play pawn here, you go knight here. If captures, you recapture. So normally black will play bishop here, and you will recapture. Now you will not take this pawn here because it's a trap. You will castle, and you just ignore the pawn, forget about it, and you follow the same theme of the idea, which is you want to move this knight to the center of the board. So the way that you move the knight to the square, of course, is to bring the rook here. And once again, let's say black plays, I don't know, like a move like rook here, you go knight here. Black still cannot recapture because, again, it's the same old fork with the rook and the pawn. And so black probably plays something like bishop here to avoid this capture. And now again, you over support, you push the pawn, you guard this knight, you get it on this, you take the territory, and you use this knight to your advantage. You use both these pawns. And again, you're going to have similar ideas to before, where you can bring the rook and try to attack with your rook and the op towards the pawn on h7. So again, it's probably not going to work quite like this, but I think it's a very simple, very smooth, straightforward plan, and that's why I'm showing it in this analysis. So this is what I would recommend. Whether xQc sees this or not, I don't know, but I think this is what he should try to play against this Caro-Kann defense. So let's go back. So xQc goes knight f3 here. And now he plays bishop d3. This move would be fine if the pawn were in front of it. But one thing that I think xQc should remember, and this applies to both colors, so if xQc does washes, like xQc, my man, one thing you got to remember, do not put a bishop in the center in front of either the queen or the king pawn, because it stuns your bishop. This bishop now can no longer come into the game because the pawn is in the way, and it can't move because your bishop is in the way of the pawn. So you're stacking pieces on top of each other. They're stumbling all over each other. and your poor little bishop here is not going to be able to go on the diagonal like it's supposed to, which is one of the reasons we generally say you want to move these pawns so that your bishops both have scope on the long diagonals. So he goes here, bishop g4. Again, another idea would be to just trade the pawns and go pawn here. Same idea, bring the bishop, make the connect 3, and then develop your other bishop. But you never want to put a bishop in front of a pawn. This can apply to white, or to give you an example with the black pieces, let's go back here. Let me rotate the board again. One thing I saw xQc do was in this position, a couple of games he brought the bishop out. Again, you do not want to do this because you stunt the bishop. This light square bishop no longer has any squares. So you do not want to put a bishop in front of any of these central pawns, because what it does is it kills the scope of your other bishop, which would really like to go here, but it can't go here. So let's go back to the game. Let's flip it back around. So he plays bishop d3, bishop g4. He trades. Now e5 is played. One thing that I would say about Fintan specifically is that he needs to be mindful of being too aggressive and overextending too early. Because while this move is okay here, actually no, it's not okay apparently, is that you can overextend. So you see the lack of development. He's pushing pawns in the center, but he only has one bishop that's developed. So every other piece is on its original square. And you need to be careful when you do that, because if you only have one piece developed, it can lead to a lot of very dicey and dangerous situations. So now xQc goes rook e1, reasonable move. And now here, easy with aces, Fintan blunders with knight c6, which allows xQc the opportunity to play knight takes pawn. If bishop takes queen, there's knight takes knight, and it's a fossil. You hit the king, your knight covers a square, and it hits the queen. So if black blocks, you just recapture. And when black recaptures, you recapture the bishop. And if black tries to block with the bishop, you recapture the queen. Now, the reason I say this is important to remember is because now let's go back. What I'm doing a lot of in this analysis, which I have not done much of, is I'm going over these games, or going over analysis of previous games that I can recall. Why I can recall them, I don't know. I'm insane. But I can't. So I'll take you guys back to a game that was played on, I believe, on, I want to say it was maybe April 13th, 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, no, I think it was April 13th. Chat can correct me if I'm wrong. There was a game played in the very famous match between xQc and Reckful. And so this, I believe, was the first game of their match.
For somebody rated around 900, do you recommend system-based openings or traditional openings?
System-based. So there was the match between xQc and Reckful, which xQc had the black piece, but I'll show it from the white point. No, I mean, I'll show it from the black point of view so he sees it, which is e4, e5. Yes, you guys, they played a match. I think they played a 6-game match. I think it was 4.5, 1.5 for Reckful. So, yes, of course, as you guys know, rest in peace, Byron. You were the man. We all miss you. I think it's only been 2 months, but man, it's feels like just yesterday. So anyway, there was e4, e5, knight f3. xQc played knight f6. Reckful played knight takes pawn. xQc played knight e4. Reckful played queen e2. I believe xQc played knight f6, which allowed knight c6. So now I'm going to rotate the board again to the white point of view. And you'll see it's the same concept here. It's the fossil. You move the knight, you hit the queen, and the queen blocks, you take the queen. If I block with a bishop, you take the queen. And so it's the exact same attacking idea. It's just a queen instead of a rook. So when we go back to this position, let me find it. When we find it, you look here. Same thing. You hit the queen with the knight, and the rook checks the king. Whereas when we go back here, you'll see it's the exact same thing. Same idea, same concept with the knight and the queen, or a knight and a rook. So I think xQc needs to kind of try to internalize these ideas. Now, what I will say about xQc is that in the famous match, the third game, the sudden death game between Ludwig and xQc in PogChamps 1 in the semifinals of the consolation bracket, he did correct his error and he played queen to e7, which is a move, albeit it's still pretty bad for black. So he corrected it, but he's got to kind of try to conceptualize his ideas and remember it from game to game. Or not game to game, but just like try to like get that pattern, see that pattern. Like, you know, I think he said once he saw chess pieces in his head. He should think about that tactic, like that knight c6, that knight, move the knight to discover the check, move the knight to create the check, move the knight to create the check. So that's what I would say is, like, just think about that. Try to like think about that a little bit in general terms. So okay, let's get back to the game. So okay, so e5, rook e1, knight e6. Now here xQc plays h3. Not a bad move, by the way. Not a bad move at all. It's quite reasonable. Fintan correctly recaptures, because if he goes back, now white can also go g4, break the pin of the bishop towards the queen. Your pawn guards the pawn, and when black moves the bishop, you just recapture this pawn. You broke the pin, and now you're just on cruise control here. So this is another thing to remember. If there's something like a pawn in the center under attack, but there's a pin potentially where you can't recapture because you lose the queen, there also are always ideas to remove the bishop, and if he stays on the diagonal instead of recapturing, to kick this away, the pawn support. Bishop goes out, and then you just take. It's an empty line here. Your pawns force the bishop back, and you recapture the pawn on e5. So let's go back. So bishop f3, queen f3, knight f6 was played here by Fintan. And now xQc plays bishop b5. An excellent move, by the way. Probably the best move in the position here, because now you pin the knight to the king. So it's like, you pin the tail on the donkey. And Fintan goes bishop e7 here. Big mistake, by the way. What he should have played was probably bishop to d6 to support the pawn. Because after you move the bishop, there are a couple good moves here. But what I'm going to say is not the best move would be rook takes pawn, because the knight can't capture since the king is pinned. But for basic purposes, since these players are relatively newer to the game, think about it in the notion of removing a defender. So when you see what's under attack, is this pawn under attack? No, it's not, because this pawn is guarded by a lot of things. Let's look at this one. You're trying to win this pawn because your rook is aiming at it. So the only thing that guards it is the knight. So can you remove a defender? Yes, you can, because you can take this knight, and when he captures, now you take the pawn. It's one defender on the pawn, so you need to also be mindful of removing defenders that guard certain pieces. Think about defenders. Can you recapture and then win something, or capture something where you get it for free? So bishop e7, he takes, and now, which is fine. And now xQc plays b3. Very bizarre move. What he should have played was just rook takes pawn. The defender is gone. It's a free juicer in the center. Might as well capture it. So he goes b3. Now here, easy with aces, castles. He should have played pawn to e4. Now the pawn, he has a pawn chain, but also the pawn is supported. It's no longer a loose target on this e5 square. So he castles. xQc again misses this idea to take. However, I would add one thing. If white captures here, and this is for a black purpose, not a white purpose, black can play knight to e4. And the reason this is such a strong move is the pawn supports the knight. But more importantly, because white has pushed this pawn, you're creating this very nasty threat of bishop f6 where you're going to skewer the rooks on e5 and a1. Like if you get this, you're losing a rook. And if you move a bishop to b2, you can go bishop to f6. Mubot says, hey, I just got back from the bathroom. Is e5 hanging? Thank you for that. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Very, very funny. Very, very funny. Very, very funny. Okay. Anyway, the point is, in this case, once you push the pawn, you should be mindful of these ideas, like moving something out of the way so you can move the bishop to discover an attack on both of these rooks here. So xQc goes bishop e2. Fintan plays e4, queen e3, queen c7. xQc takes. Big mistake, by the way. Generally, one thing I would suggest for xQc, since I know he likes to fianchetto his bishops, where he creates these three pawns and puts a bishop inside. The whole point of having the bishop inside this triangle here is that you want to use its power. It's like a mighty piece on the diagonal. You almost never want to trade this bishop when it's inside this triangle, unless you're winning like a queen or a rook, or you're winning a lot of material. This bishop is the best piece on the board. You do not want to do it, because when you take, you now create weaknesses where you have to push pawns and stuff things in the way. And this, when you create this triangle like this, and you put the bishop inside the triangle, it's like the op, or it's to use the term, I think it was Fuseli said, or no, was it Fuseli or was it Chocobars? I don't remember which one it was. They said something about like a sniper's nest. So it's like you create this nest here with these three pawns, and you put the op or the sniper inside of this, and it's very compact, very safe, and you don't get rid of it. You just keep it here. It's like the op. You just sit in that corner like Wardell. You just sit in that corner. You hold that corner, and when your opponent falls asleep and moves a knight or something, then you get the headshot and you checkmate on g7. So that's why, in general terms, when you create this, whether it's this side or even the other side, you never want to get rid of it. So to give you an example, let's go back to the start of the game. Let's go back. let's say here white, I'm just going to give an example. Let's say you go like this, for example, and you put the bishop. It's the same thing. You create this triangle of 3, and you put the op behind it. Again, it's a very powerful piece, and you always want to be aiming down the diagonal down the road. So let's go ahead. So now this is a very unfortunate move. What I would have recommended is something like knight to c3 or d3 maybe. I actually like this pawn push. And another thing to conceptualize in terms of pushing this pawn is that you would like to keep this line open for the op, because it's like, you know, why do you have the sniper if you're gonna have to shut it down? Like if you bring the knight out, you shut down any of your threats long term. So what you would try to do here is actually keep the line open, keep the line of sight open, and develop your knight, because these two pieces are on the original squares, by pushing the pawn and moving the knight here so that you keep the line open. So that's why you want to play it like this, and then you put pressure on this pawn. If black were to capture here, for example, you actually lose material because you can take. You have 1, 2, and you win a bishop here for nothing. So you're going to be ahead by 2 or 3 points. So that's why you want to do this and bring the knight and then bring the other rook to the center, but you always keep the sniper with a full line of sight down towards this diagonal where the king is. So he takes, he plays d4, and now this is a move that originally looks fine, but unfortunately it kind of loses the game here, because there's this very unpleasant move called en peasant, or en passant if we're going to speak proper French, which is pawn takes pawn. So when you play pawn takes pawn, what happens is you remove the pawn, you pass through it, and you can't recapture the pawn because then you lose your rook in the corner. The sniper here for black is just targeting your rook, and this is very, very bad. What I would also add, secondly, for Fintan is if you end up in a spot where you have a bishop that's on one of these diagonals where your opponent has created this sort of nest and they don't have the sniper in behind it, you can also try to take advantage by ripping open the diagonal if you don't have en peasant by playing pawn to c5. So now you try to rip it open. White can't take, so again you win the rook. And if white blocks, you trade and you go queen here. And you try to put max pressure down this diagonal towards where this rook is in the corner. So it's very important to note that if you end up in a spot where you have a bishop that's on one of these diagonals and your opponent has this formation where they try to put the sniper or the bishop inside of it and they no longer have it, then it's very, very bad. So a5 is played, xQc plays c4, rook e8, knight c3, pretty normal, rook d8, trade, knight b5, very good move, queen b6, a4. Now this is a very advanced concept. I know xQc certainly did not intend for this, but one thing that you need to remember, and I think this certainly applies to this game for xQc, is he was always thinking, well, black can take and black's ahead. Think about all of your pieces, and by all your pieces, I don't even mean pawns. Think about your queen, your knight, your rooks. Think about your pieces. And so when black takes, try to think it through, like what pieces can guard, which pieces guard the square. And so the thing is, the knight actually is very good because it guards. You have 1, 2 to guard. So just think about the queens, knights, rooks, and bishops as the pieces. Don't worry about the pawns so much. Try to think about the placement of them. Try to see if you can, if it's all holding together. Now, obviously, it's easier said than done. I mean, I get it. It's not trivial. But this was a great play by xQc because this is a deep concept, not something that most people will understand. But this is called an outpost. So if you look at this position, the knight is really good because you have the knight and the queen guarding, but the pawn guards the knight, so the knight is permanently planted on this outpost, this square, because the pawns can't go back and ever attack. Like black would like to put this pawn here or this pawn here to remove the knight where it's under attack, but you can't move pawns backwards. So the pawn on a4 and the pawn on b3 supports pawn on a4. Pawn on a4 supports the knight on b5. So you have a permanent outpost that cannot be removed. So now Fintan plays h6. Fantastic move, by the way. Creates look for the king. No potential ice skaters on the back rank. But then secondarily, after rook c1, there's a very nice move here. Very hard to find, which is bishop to g5. The reason this is so strong, pawn supports the bishop, but now the queen and rook are under attack. And if you push f4, black can again play en peasant with e takes f3. And if you move the queen, I just take the rook. So you're gonna lose a queen or you're gonna lose a rook because this bishop, the sniper, is just targeting them both on the diagonal. So now he goes rook c8. They trade rook c1, another reasonable move by xQc. They trade bishop d4. And now here, probably the best way to proceed would have been not to trade. Black is currently up a juicer, so think of this in like geometry terms. You can try to look for checks. He could have played queen c8 check, king h7, queen f5 check. And the point is, again, you hit both pawns, you hit the king. And if black tries to block, you can just take this pawn here with check. And when black goes back, I think you can actually now take here, bishop here. I don't know, maybe this just loses. Maybe there's nothing better than a draw, but the notion of seeing these ideas with this check and the fact you always have these ideas of draw with checking is important in future rounds. Also, after queen f5, king g8, you could maybe take this pawn on d5, and it still remains a very complicated game. So that's probably what I would recommend. Instead, he trades, he checks, and now here, unfortunately, due to the circumstances, xQc had to win. He could have just gone check. If the king goes back, there's a draw. Whoa! Thank you, Holterman. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you so much. Because if black blocks, then you eat the pawn, and so it would just be a repetition. This is an important concept again. So try to formalize. I guess a way to try to formalize. Think about the pawn formation and the king and your queen. If you have these ideas of this check, 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 like this yo-yo swing back and forth. Instead, he goes queen f4, check, queen b3. Fantastic move by Fintan. Perfectly played. Check, hit the king. But then also, not only do you hit the king, you can just grab the pawn on b3. Perfect moves by Fintan here. f3, e3. Another good move, queen and pawn endgame. Try to create the pass pawns and win the game. Whoa! Thank you, pass pawns, for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you so much. Queen c7, e2. Another move, maybe not the best move, because it again allows this formation with the check. Check with the draw. If you push, I take. If you go back, I just swing with the yo-yo. So probably better would have been to play queen here, because what this does is it guards all the squares on the diagonal, and now your queen is also going to protect and escort this pawn straight down the board to make another queen. So this would be better because on check you go here, and now your queen covers, no check, and your queen is just escorting this pawn straight up the board. And once you get that second queen, it's GG-O. So let's go back. So he plays e2, queen a5, queen e3. Fantastic move by Fintan, because in this case there are no checks on these light squares. So now the queen and the pawn, again, much like the other endgames where you want a rook behind a pawn, when you get a queen behind a pawn like this, it's extremely powerful. So xQc checks. If he tries to stop the queen with the queen here, black can win because he just goes here, a5, d3, a6, d2. And again, queen is escorting both pawns. Black's going to get at least another queen, if not more, and it's completely winning. So xQc goes check, king h7, queen d5, queen check, and now king g8. And here he goes g4. He could have tried to check to make a draw, but unfortunately, since black has 2 queens, black can now block with the queen, instead of having to repeat with the king move because the queens just guard each other. So instead he goes g4, and now black plays queen f2, which is checkmate. And unfortunately with that, Fintan, unfortunate for xQc, but fortunately for Fintan, he wins the match 2-0 and gains his 3 critical points in this first match. So general thoughts, I would say again, Fintan, totally deserving winner. I'm revealing my allegiance. I mean, I want to see xQc do well. Obviously, I want to see him do well. But in fairness, Fintan deserved to win. Make no mistake about it. Fintan played the better chess, and he was 100% the deserving winner. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I'm being dead serious. I'm being serious. So Fintan played good chess overall. A couple misslips, I would say, for Fintan. The biggest thing is, don't be too aggressive. It's like when he plays this opening and he goes like e5, it's a little bit too aggressive. You got to develop, I think normally if you're trying to take a center, you got to develop a couple of pieces first. You need to develop like a bishop and a knight, not just one bishop like he did in this game, or in the first game developing one knight and trying to take the center right away. So I think he needs to bring more than one piece out before you try to get super hyper aggressive and punish your opponent. But other than that, I thought very, very good play by Fintan. That's really my only critique. For xQc, what I would say is that in general, he's got to try to internalize the tactics. Tactics is where xQc is strong. That's where he has the best instincts. He has the right ideas coming to him immediately. So I would say for xQc, the instincts. Trust the instincts of the tactics. Try to look for the tactics. Trust yourself. Because he's got that instinct, and if he can play the tactics, he's going to have a very good chance to perform well. And honestly, I think he has a good chance, even if he plays like he did today, to make it to the championship bracket. So that's the first match between xQc and Fintan. I actually enjoyed that quite a bit, so I think I'm going to do more. I'm going to do another. I'm going to do some commentary on the match between Thor, Half Thor, Julius, and Wagamama. But first, I'm going to take a short break. I think so. So yeah, I'm going to take Well, I guess first of all, before we go to break, let's see this. Who wins tomorrow in the match between Mizkif and Austin? Do we have Austin Show in 2, Mizkif in 2, Austin Show in Armageddon, Mizkif in Armageddon, or the fans? I know who should win, but let's see. Let's see what we've got. Let's see what we've got. Let's see. Let's see what we've got. The winner... Ooh, man, there are a lot of Austin fans in chat right now, aren't there? A lot of Austin fans in chat. Holy macaroni. There are a lot of Austin fans. That's crazy. So many Austin fans. I'm impressed. I'm honestly impressed. So many Austin fans. Wow. 50% of you think that Austin Show is going to win in 2? Only 15% of you guys think that Mizzy Wizzy has a chance. Wow. Okay, so Mizzy Wizzy... yeah, so Austin Show in 2 is 51%. Fans say fans will win 26%. Mizkif in 2, 15%. 4% say Austin Show in Armageddon. 4% say Mizkif in Armageddon. So it's pretty clear. We have clear consensus that